On this segment, I'm actually quite excited because it's going to be insightful. One thing we get to hear, well, is religion, is it a white man's religion? I see the picture of Jesus. I haven't seen him in my dream. You know, it's white skin, but to the glory of God, the next voice you're going to hear after my voice is none other but a dynamic voice in today's church. Someone that is a pastor, a theologian, speaker, and self-proclaimed Bible nerd, who is deeply passionate about helping people's life live inspired by love, justice, and faith, with both a bachelor's and a master's degree in theology. He brings rich well of biblical knowledge and cultural insight, paired with an unmistakable passion for seeing faith come alive in everyday life. He is the founder of Humabo. My apologies if I did not get that pronunciation right. The Journey, it's a groundbreaking online video Bible study resource designed to empower individuals and churches to understand scripture for themselves, connecting ancient truths to modern challenges in clear and transformative ways. He also serves as a part of the Sankota Collective, an ecumenical community committed to racial justice and reconciliation with the Christian faith. Whether he's teaching, mentoring, or challenging us to think deeper, he is committed to helping people become confident, courageous followers of Jesus in a complex world. Well, church, with Jesus' joy and with Lighthouse, warm welcome. Will you rise up onto your feet as we welcome none other but Jeronne Rudder? Put your hands together. Hallelujah.
Thank you so much. Wow. Just quickly before you take your seats, how many people, just by a show of hands, have scars on their body? Just by a kushona. Okay, yeah. So, because we understand that scars tell stories, don't they? Scars, they tell stories. I have a scar on the top of my head, and it actually happened to me when I was 10 years old. I was going on my friend's bike. There were 3 metal bars that we had to go underneath. The first one I went under, I was fine. Second one, I went under, and the corner of the metal arch split my head open. And in a matter of moments, my white t-shirt became crimson red. And I got taken to the hospital, and they didn't stitch my head together, they glued my head together. And now I have a scar on my head. Because scars tell stories. But that's not the full story that scars tell. Because scars tell the story that even though you went through the pain, even though you went through the strife, even though you went through the struggle, even though you experienced the difficulty, you are still here today. Because scars, they still tell stories, but the full story is that you overcame it. The real story is that when you were knocked down, you were still able to get back up. The real story is that you're still here today. And I want to contain my preacher in me, but the worship was so good. Can I talk about the scars that happened on Good Friday and Easter Sunday? Because the scars in his hand, they tell the story of betrayal and denial. The scars in his side, they tell the story that Jesus picked 12 men, and when he needed them the most, they deserted him. The scars on his head, they tell the story of human separation. But can I tell you today that that is not the full story that the scars tell? Because the scar in his hand tells the story that even though we betrayed him, he never betrays us. The scar in his side, it tells the story that even when we are unfaithful to him, he is never unfaithful to us. That he is a covenant-keeping God. The scar on his head, it tells the story of human separation, but now we are reconciled to our Creator. Because scars tell stories. And his scars have changed our story. And if you're in here and you're a bit of a skeptic, I want to let you know today you are amongst people whose story has been changed because of the scars of Jesus Christ. And we hope that you will reflect on the evidence that has been put before you today to analyze the scars on Jesus' body so you can consider a change in your story. You can take your seats. You're probably thinking, when is he going to let us sit down? I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pretty excited to be here. Today has been absolutely amazing. My name is Jeronne. I am the director and founder of Uhambo, The Journey, which is a video Bible study resource that helps people to unpack and study the Bible for themselves. I finished my master's 2 years ago in theology, and I was like, I'm a local pastor. I need to do something with this. And so I created this kind of platform, and we have about 150 episodes on our platform, 15 to 20 minutes long, because I understand that people have a hunger to read the Bible, but sometimes they're time poor. And so how do we still enable people to understand and dive into the Bible? We are massive about biblical literacy, because biblical literacy helps you to see the character of God. Now, let me explain to you why that is so important. My wife isn't here today, but if you spoke to her and you said, hey, I saw Jeronne walking around town in a Tottenham Hotspurs t-shirt, she would be able to refute the claim straight away because she knows my character. Because she knows that I believe that North London is red. She knows that I support the greatest team in North London. She knows that I support a team that this season is going to win the Champions League. I know I got some supporters out there. We've got to prophesy some of this stuff, you know what I mean? Call it as it is not and all that type of stuff. But she knows all of this. She knows all of it because she knows my character. There are so many claims that are made about God today that if you do not know God's character that is revealed in the pages of the Bible, it becomes very difficult for you to refute those claims. And so that's what we're all about at Uhambo. The Journey is helping people to see God's character through the pages of the Bible. And so if you want to find out a little bit more, you can scan the QR code that will take you to our website, or you can come over to the stand afterwards, scan the QR code, and we can talk a little bit more about it. But are we ready to dive into this question today? Are we ready to dive in? It's such an important question, such a vital question that is being asked not just by us, but by many people. And when I was given this question, the first thing that came to my mind was a Trojan horse. The question I was given, which is the next slide, is this. This is the question that we're supposed to be talking about today. Is Christianity simply a vessel for propagating cultural ideas, values, and beliefs, or is there something more to it? And the thing that came to my mind was a Trojan horse. I don't know if you know the story of the Trojan horse. It's in Greek mythology about how there was a massive wooden horse that was left outside of the gates of Troy. And they thought in the city that this Trojan horse was from the gods. And so they brought it into the city and they began to celebrate because they believed that this meant that they were victorious. And in the dead of night, when everything was quiet, some soldiers came out of that Trojan horse and slaughtered every single person in that city. And I asked myself the question, is this what Christianity is? Because we have some scars in the black community that tell a story of the violence, the pillaging, and the impact of colonialism upon the continent of Africa and all those that come from Africa. Is this what Christianity is? Just merely a Trojan horse that is propagating ideologies of black inferiority? Is Christianity just a vessel that communicates cultural ideas, beliefs, and values that are for the downfall of black people? I can only talk about it in my own context as a black person. And we're going to go on this journey because there is some evidence that may point towards a different answer. So, this question is not just a question that is asked of ourselves today, but also in popular culture. I don't know if you've heard of somebody called Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Umar Johnson, he is a Pan-Africanist, he is a black activist, and he is a motivational speaker. And he went onto the Breakfast Club in 2017, and he had these words to say. Just watch this video, watch the screen. Is it working? No? Okay, don't worry. One of the things that he speaks about in the interview, it's just a 30-second clip. If they can show it later on, that would be really helpful. But he talks about how the devastation of the white Jesus. He says he's got a problem with the image of the white Jesus. Because he goes on to talk about that when children who are in Sunday school have this image of a white Jesus, one of the things that it communicates to them is that white is right and black should step back. And so he has this issue when we are talking about the white Jesus. And when we talk about Christianity, specifically in the West, the face of Christianity in the West is been the white Jesus. There's evidence for it. They show a picture of the head of Christ, which is Warner Sallman in 1944. He painted this picture. You can just throw that up for me, please. And you see in this picture of a Jesus who has blue eyes and blonde hair. I'm from the Caribbean, and so in my grandma's house, they would often have up in the front room this picture of this blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus. Video's all right? Let's show the video. Thank you so much.
If you choose to identify as American, it's not that difficult to learn from whence you came. We all walk that road. But when you have been convinced that white people...
Which is the head of Christ. Here we have the head of Christ, blonde-eyed, blonde hair, blue eyes. And then, do you remember the Passion of the Christ? Yeah. The guy that played Jesus was a white guy. I took my kids to go see the King of Kings film in the cinema, the animated version. Took my kids to see that. And the very first thing they said in their analysis and evaluation...
If you choose to identify as American, it's not that difficult to learn from whence you came. We all walk that road. But when you have been convinced that white people are better than you, when your subconscious has been programmed to believe that white is right and anything black should automatically get back, you will never get to the point where you even want to investigate your history because you've already been convinced that you have none, which is why for me that white Jesus picture is one of the greatest weapons of mass destruction in the black community. When a black boy or girl goes to Sunday school and look at a white Jesus from birth until age 5, by the time they go to kindergarten, they have already been convinced that if God is white, then it's okay for the president to be white. It's okay for the judge to be white. It's okay for the CEO to be white. It's okay for the police to be white, because if God is white, then all white people must be of God.
Some compelling opinions, isn't it? This is not just a question that is being asked in popular culture and by us. It's also a question that is asked in academia as well. But let me tell you a bit about what my children said about the film King of Kings. They came out, the very first thing they said is, the film was all right, but Jesus weren't white though. You can see the type of kids I'm raising. He said, Jesus weren't white though. I don't understand. Why did they make Jesus look like that? And this whole thing around the white Jesus and it being the face of Christianity, as I said, it's not just something in popular culture, it's also something in academia. Dr. Tabitha, in her book, she's one of about 4 authors of this book. She says this, next slide for me. Oh, sorry, yeah, keep going for time. She says this, white Jesus is so much more than an icon. It's not neutral, because it has been prolificated and it's expanded in terms of its presence over centuries. It has been largely tied to what we call an imperial project, the agenda of a nation state. What she is putting forward there is that white Jesus is much more than just a picture, that it's actually a symbol, that it's an icon. And symbols hold messages. Symbols have stories behind them. And the story behind the symbol of a white Jesus, she is stating, is one of imperialism, is one of colonialism. Now, let me just parenthetically add here and say this, that cultural expressions of Jesus are not wrong. Cultural expressions of Jesus are not wrong. But what is problematic about the white Jesus is that it's become normative. It's become the normative way of how we are supposed to see Jesus. So the question is Christianity a vessel for cultural ideas, beliefs, and values? Is Christianity simply just a Trojan horse that is transporting into the black community ideas of black inferiority, or as our friend Dr. Umar Johnson says, that white is right and black should step back? Is it just that? Jerome Gay, in his book, The Whitewashing of Christianity, he says this. Next slide. When you examine his genealogy, this is Jesus that he's talking about. When you examine his genealogy, you find a vast array of ethnicities which suggests that the idea of Jesus being white would be inconsistent with his earthly lineage. But this is ignored in how he's portrayed in Bibles, children's stories, art, print, and film. This isn't accidental or amoral. This isn't a coincidence, guys. This isn't just the artist's impression. He goes on to say, whitewashing Jesus was used as a tool for white supremacy, black inferiority, and institutional control. Got very quiet in this. Mad quiet, Pastor. Real quiet. Because the question we're wrestling with today is Christianity a vessel for cultural ideas, beliefs, and values? Is Christianity a Trojan horse that transports ideologies into the black community of black inferiority? Or, as our friend Dr. Umar says, that white is right and black should step back? And it gets worse. Because when we begin to examine some of the rhetoric, the preaching that is pro-slavery, begin to examine some of the preaching that is pro-slavery. Kelly Brown Douglas, in her book, The Black Christ, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Kelly Brown Douglas believes in terms of sexuality and some of the other issues, but she makes some phenomenal observations about the history of Christianity and black people. She says this, and this is quoting from a preacher who is preaching to black people, black slaves, okay? She says this, our Lord repeatedly spoke of slaves, especially in several of his parables, without the slightest intimation that he condemned slavery. and in such a way plainly showed that he considered it lawful. This is the type of rhetoric that is being pushed out to black slaves. That Jesus, he did not condemn slavery, but actually, he probably condoned it. Goes on to say this, that we are told in Matthew 8:23-35 that a centurion came to Jesus, beseeching him to heal his sick servant. If the holding of slaves had been sinful, Jesus would, we doubt not, have so informed the centurion. What Kelly Brown Douglas is painting a picture of us for us today is that there were preachers, that there were pastors, that propagated this understanding that Jesus was not against slavery. So you guys should be okay to just remain in slavery. Slave owners were so afraid of bringing Christianity initially to enslaved Africans because they understood that there were socio-political implications of what it means to be a Jesus follower. All you have to do is take the story of Exodus, which is paradigmatic for us understanding what salvation is. They were not just saved and liberated spiritually, they were saved and liberated physically. They didn't metaphorically leave Egypt, they physically left Egypt. So, if this is paradigmatic for what we are supposed to understand what salvation is, and then Jesus has said that he comes to take away the sins of the world, to save the world, then we have to understand that salvation is both spiritual and physical. And so, Christians who enslaved Africans, they knew this. They knew this. They knew the cheat code. And they needed to hide it from us. And this is what Kelly Brown Douglas says, that black enslaved Africans had to agree to when they got baptized. Next slide. It says, you declare in the presence of God and before this congregation that you do not ask for holy baptism out of any design to free yourself from the duty and obedience you owe to your master while you live. So you can get baptized, but don't ask for your freedom, though. You can get baptized, but don't ask for us to release you from your slavery. Goes on to say, but merely, this is it. It says, but you're asking to be baptized merely for the good of your soul to partake in the graces and blessings promised to the members of the church of Jesus Christ. What did we say that Exodus teaches us about salvation? That it's both spiritual and... So what are they doing here? They're separating the spiritual from the... They want your soul to be free, but your body to be in chains. And we got to ask this question, don't we? Because this is the evidence. Is Christianity a vessel for cultural beliefs, ideas, and values? Is Christianity merely just a Trojan horse that is transporting into the black community ideologies of black inferiority? Or as our friend Umar Johnson says, that white is right and black should step back? It's awful quiet in here, Pastor. Hopefully we get invited back, Charlie, because... And it gets worse when we get to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was around the 17th to 19th century. It was the renaissance of an appreciation for Greek aesthetics. And Europe actually believed that they saw themselves in the kind of this Greek mythical way, like the gods. That's how they saw themselves. And what we have in the Enlightenment is we have this convergence between anthropology, which is the study of man, and theology, which is the study of God, this convergence that pushes forward the idea of black inferiority. This is what some of the anthropologists at the time believed. that the black skin was a cause from leprosy. So Benjamin Rush, a physician in his presentation to the American Philosophical Society, said, Negro color was due to leprosy. They believed in the Enlightenment, the study of anthropology, that black skin, it wasn't normative, and actually the normative color for human beings was white. Because when you're born, you're as pale as this cardigan, innit? And then over time, Oral Thompson, in his book, he goes on to say, what this led to is a person of consequence or worthiness was to be white or of fair complexion. Do you know what this opens the door to? Colorism. Because the closer you are to white, the more worthy you are. The further you are away from white, the less worthy you are. So can you see that even within the context of the black community, when we prefer lighter skinned people over darker skinned people, we are doing the work of our slave masters. And we have to ask the question, don't we, Pastor, that is Christianity a vessel for cultural ideas and beliefs and values? Is Christianity simply just a Trojan horse that is trying to communicate to us black inferiority? Or, as our friend Umar Johnson said, is it white is right and black should step back? And so I want to ask you a question. With the evidence that I've produced, and at the end of this slide, I have a bibliography and all my references, so you can go check me out, see if I'm just making some of this stuff up. But I want to ask you a question. Based on the evidence, is Christianity a cultural vessel? Is Christianity a Trojan horse? Because I could tell you story after story of our ancestors where in the name of Christianity, women have been beaten. In the name of Christianity, children have been ripped from their homes. In the name of Christianity, men have been seen as products and commodities. This is the one moment where your Sunday school teacher's answer, which is Jesus is the answer to everything, is slightly inappropriate, isn't it, really? This is like the one place it's probably not great to say that. But if we're going to answer this question with authenticity and credibility, we need to have the full story. We need to have the full story. Because if we don't have the full story, then we are unable to make a decision, an informed decision, an analysis in regards to the question. So that makes the assumption that this is just half of the story. It's a story that we have to acknowledge, though, but it's half of the story. And for the next few moments that I have with you, I want to unpack the rest of the story in 3 quick points. Firstly, through the point of black presence in the Bible. Secondly, through black presence in theology. And thirdly, through black people having the presence of mind. So let's start with the first one. Black presence in the Bible. Black presence in the Bible. So we're going to go to Acts chapter 8. And it's going to come up onto the screen, Acts chapter 8. And it says this: Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go down to the road and the desert road that goes down to Jerusalem to Gaza. So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of Kandake. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home he was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. We're going to jump down to verse 36 just for time. It says this: as they traveled along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch, the Ethiopian eunuch, said, look, here is water. What can stand in the way of me being baptized? And he gave orders to stop the chariot, and then both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When he came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away, and the eunuch did not see him again, but went on his way rejoicing. Philip, however, appeared at Azotus and traveled about preaching the gospel in all the towns until he reached Caesarea. So we know this story. This story is about the Ethiopian eunuch. And I'm assuming you know this information, but let me just say it so that we're all on the same page. That Ethiopia is one of the countries that was not colonized. It was not colonized. But they accepted Christianity for the truthful claims that Christianity had about itself. So I need to put that out there, that Ethiopia was not colonized and they accepted Christianity. Whereas many of us, we've been told the only reason why us as Africans, the only reason why us as Caribbeans, that we accepted Christianity because it was thrust upon us. But the Bible tells us that this Ethiopian eunuch, now let's dig a bit deeper into this, because he wasn't just some poor beggar on the street. He was the chief finance officer. David Peterson, in his commentary on Acts, he says this: Luke draws particular attention to the Ethiopian's high social status. His function as a chief finance officer in the Ethiopian court made him directly responsible to Candace, who was a queen of the Ethiopians. This is what he goes on to say, that this name is not a personal name, this is a dynasty. So it's not just like, oh, one queen. Like this is the name that is given. You know, like Caesar Augustus was like given to like all of the, this is how it is. This is the power that, and the regalness and the royalty that this Ethiopian eunuch, this is the type of person that he was working for. Then we're told, we got this word chariot. So that tells me that he's got power. And Philip gets into his chariot. So when we look at the power dynamics between Philip and this Ethiopian eunuch, we've got to ask the question, who's really got the power here? The Ethiopian eunuch is the one that has the power. But he hears the truthful claims about Christianity and he decides to get baptized. There's black presence in the Bible. I went to go speak at a church and it was around, what is it called? Oh, completely out of my mind. Black History Month. And they asked the question about black presence in the Bible. And one of the things I said that it's really difficult to talk about black presence in the Bible. It's really difficult to talk about it. Because when we ask that question, there's an assumption that it's not there. When really, the talk should be white presence in the Bible. Because we have to go looking for it. Let's keep going. Second thing is this is black presence in theology. Thomas C. Oden, in his book, How Africa Shaped Early Christianity, he says that Africa shaped Christianity, early Christianity, in 7 ways. 7 ways. He says this. The first one is the birth of the European university was anticipated within African Christianity. He says, number 2, Christian historical and spiritual exegesis, which is like the interpretation of the Bible, first matured in Africa. Not in Rome, in Africa. Goes on to say, African thinkers shaped the very core of Christian dogma. The method of ecumenical decision-making found its birth in African conciliaries pattern. So you know how we always talk about like the Nicene Creed? Oh, we love a Nicene Creed. Not realizing that the way that they came to decisions, that methodology, it was birthed in Africa. Let's keep going. Africa shaped Western forms of spiritual formation through monastic discipline. Neoplatonist philosophy of late antiquity moved from Africa to Europe, and literary and dialectical skills were refined in Africa. So there's black presence in theology. That when man started to begin to try and theologize and have some sort of God talk, that's what theology is, having some sort of God talk, some language to understand God, the place that it birthed in was Africa. Thomas C. Oden, he goes on to say this: the rules and methods for interpreting scripture were decisively shaped not by Africa's greatest scientist, investigator of sacred texts, Origen, but also by 4th and 5th century African exegetes like Didymus the Blind, Tarculus, and Augustine of Hippo. Now, whenever we think about Augustine, innit, you just think of a white guy with a beard. He's one of the great church early fathers. That's what we think about, but he's from the continent of Africa. He ain't from Rome. Vince Bantu, who I have to acknowledge there is a bit of scandal around Vince Bantu at this present moment, and we've not come to the conclusion of the scandal, but I want to park his scandal to the side for a bit because I believe that he makes some very helpful observations around the history of Christianity and the continent of Africa. He says this: over a century before the reform of Martin Luther in Europe, so the Reformation, like we in Britain, they love a Reformation, man. They love it. They love a Reformation, okay? But he goes on to say, a whole century before that, in the Ethiopian church, they were speaking about similar things. A whole century before Martin Luther. Goes on to say that some of the things that they were, among the theological critiques of the dominant church was this: the involvement of governmental officials in church ordinations, prostrating to the Ethiopian emperor, and placing church teachings on the same level of authority with Scripture. These are some of the 3 key things that Martin Luther, in his Reformation, was fighting against. And a whole century before, on the continent of Africa, in Ethiopia, us, man, were having that conversation already. We were saying, we're not too sure about this governmental thing, we're not too sure about this, not too sure about that. Let's keep going. Black people having the presence of mind, because often my uncle at the barbecue will tell me, Jeronne, you have been tricked. Jeronne, you have been duped. Jeronne, you are being controlled by the white man. That's why you're a Christian. Black people having the presence of mind. In the slave narrative, Frederick Douglass, he says this. He says, what I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slave-holding religion of this land. He's talking about America, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-pundling, partial, hypocritical Christianity of this land. What Frederick Douglass is showing us, that he has the presence of mind to distinguish between the two. He is not some mindless zombie that just accepts Christianity because his slave master said it, No, he is accepting Christianity on the truthful claims that Christianity says about itself. Esau Macaulay, in his book, Reading While Black, he says these words. He's actually commenting upon Frederick Douglass's analysis. He says this: Frederick then posits a distinction not so much between black Christianity and white. We need to be careful. I'm not saying that there's a division between black people and white people. I'm just saying that what Frederick Douglass is showing us is something a little bit more profound. He says, but between slaveholder religion and the Christianity of Jesus and the Bible. Black Christianity, historically, I would come to understand, has claimed that white slave master readings of the Bible used to undergird white denigration of black bodies was not merely one manifestation of Christianity to be contrasted with another. Instead, they said that such a reading was wrong. We're not contrasting one type of Christianity that believes that it's okay to enslave black people and another type of Christianity that thinks something different. No. That is wrong. I would go far as saying, that's not even Christianity. And then he goes on to say, enslaved black people, even those who remained illiterate, in effect, questioned white exegesis. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, don't we? Is Christianity a vessel for cultural ideas, beliefs, and values? Is Christianity a Trojan horse that seeks to transport itself into the black community and propagate ideologies of black inferiority? Or as our friend Dr. Umar Johnson says, that white is right and black should step back. You have the evidence. You now have the full story. Can I just offer one personal observation? Is that okay? I believe that if we think that Christianity is just a Trojan horse, I believe if we just think Christianity is just a vessel for cultural ideas and beliefs of black inferiority, then I believe we are doing a disservice to our ancestors. Because we are making them out to be stupid and that they had no critical thinking and that they were mindless and they were zombies. That is what we are saying if we just believe that Christianity is a vessel or a Trojan horse. We're saying that my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was silly and was foolish. Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was foolish and stupid. That's what we're saying if we believe that Christianity is a Trojan horse. Can I even go further with that observation? We are saying that every white supremacist is right. We're saying that they are right about us, that we are stupid, that we don't have a brain. That's why we accepted Christianity. That's what we're saying. If we believe that Christianity is just a vessel, and if Christianity is a Trojan horse. I would want to suggest to you today that we do not judge Christianity on the harmful ways it has been used in history, but about the truthful claims it says about itself. The claims that Jesus says about himself, the claims that Christianity says about itself, is that all humanity has fallen. That all humanity has fallen and has decided to live in God's world on their terms. And they have opened themselves up to the chaos of sin. And we have racked up a bill and we can't pay that bill off. And so we are in need of a Savior. And Jesus steps out of eternity into history. And he dies a sinner's death, even though he committed no sin. And at the end of his ascension, he gives every single one of us the opportunity to make a decision, to look at the evidence and make a decision to say either he will be our king or Caesar will be our king. We have to make a choice. This is the truthful claims, or these are the claims that Christianity makes about itself. That anybody that decides to make Jesus their Lord and their King open themselves up to new life. An existence that is not fraught with anxiety and fear and worry, but is characterized by love, peace, and joy. This is the claims that Christianity makes about itself. And I would want to propose today that there are probably one or two people in here who have experienced the transformational power of Jesus Christ and could probably add some testimony to the claims that Christianity makes about itself. So you have to ask the question, is Christianity a vessel for cultural ideas, beliefs, and ideas? Is Christianity a Trojan horse that is used to transport ideologies of black inferiority into the black community? Or, as our friend Dr. Umar Johnson says, that white is right and black should step back? You have to make that decision for yourself. Thank you.
Appreciate Jeronne for, yes, quite provocative. You started asking these questions, and the room got really quiet. But I have some questions for you. By the way, when we finish, for the next 10 minutes or so, Jeronne and I will have this Q&A, and then the rest of the speakers will come up, and then we'll have an open session. Now, if you've seen the QR code and you've sent questions, we can't take all the questions there, but what you can do is to go there and start upvoting questions that you want to see answered, because that's how we can get through those questions. There may also be an opportunity to ask a question live. We only have 45 minutes, so we'll see how we get that, right? So we'll speak to Jeronne, and then get your questions ready, because everybody's going to come up here, including Pastor Timmy, right? And then we can ask them the questions. So, Jeronne, there's been an upsurge in African traditional religion recently. And somebody says, as somebody that really sympathizes with the reasons for that, which you so very nicely and clearly, if I may say, even compellingly outlined in the first part of your presentation, how do I, as a Christian, respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think the fact is, first we have to affirm the why. And we have to acknowledge, why has there been an upsurge? And I think some of the reasons, or one of the reasons there has been an upsurge, is because, and I found it even in my own ministry, I've done my stint in youth ministry, and so I've got the permanent smell of links and all that other stuff in my nose. But I remember in 2020, where everything happened around George Floyd and the conversation around racial justice and racism came up to the world stage. The reality is that it was always a conversation. And sometimes I would say people's shock and surprise is a little bit indicative of maybe the bubble that they lived in. But I had young people in the ministry that I was leading who didn't feel like they could go to the Bible for a reason or a defense or any type of theological rationale as to how to respond to the issue of racism. And I see that as an indictment upon my leadership, and so that's why I went to go get a master's, so I could do that properly. But that is some of the reasons that there's been an upsurge, is because we haven't necessarily taught that in the context of the biblical story, there is theological rationale that condemns racism. Racism is a sin. Just by show of hands, how many people here have ever heard a sermon just on racism? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the cumulative years that probably we've all been in church is like the thousands, maybe. Because I was in church from even before I existed, okay? And that's a problem. So if your church is not talking about this, that is so much a part of your lived experience, and then I meet you on the street, and you start telling me that I'm a king from way back then, that we are the real kings and queens of this earth, can you not see why that is appealing? So we have to affirm that there's a gap. And then what we have to do is then look into the pages of the Bible and see, as we highlighted earlier on, black presence in the Bible. Talk about black presence in theology, and talk about the fact that black people had the presence of mind to critically analyze the claims of Christianity, even if they were coming from slave owners, and say, you're wrong in what you're doing, but you're right in what you're saying. And I think we have to do that. We have to affirm, I understand why, but we also have to point people to Scripture.
Thank you. And that third part about pointing to scriptures is kind of why we're here as well, right? Because if it stops at affirming, then eventually you end up in the same place.
Yeah.
So this one is a quick one. If it's okay to have a white Jesus, is it not okay to have a black Jesus as well?
So I think one of the things that I highlighted was it's okay to have cultural expressions of Jesus. It is okay to have cultural expressions of Jesus. But what is problematic about the white Jesus is that it became normative, and as we highlighted, and maybe some of you will agree or not agree, that it became a vessel for ideas of violence and denigration of the black body. That we can't, it's very difficult to deny that, but that's what history tells us. So I would actually suggest that if that is what the white Jesus represents, contextually, especially for pastors and leaders or people that are amongst black communities, it may be helpful to have images of a black Jesus. Why? Because it will communicate different and polar opposite values that the white Jesus image represents. I watch Marvel, I'm going to say this last bit. I watch Marvel, and in Marvel over the last few years, there's been this whole thing about multiverse, 100 million multiverses. So if we all lived in a multiverse and in a version of the world, reality, where the white Jesus image did not have these negative connotations towards it, then it will be fine. It will be fine. But we don't live in that space. That's not to say that there's something wrong with white people innately. No, there isn't. But it's to say that the way that the white Jesus has been used, we may have to do some work in revising where and how we have that iconography in our churches, because it may be further perpetuating an understanding that white is right and black should step back. So,
or maybe not have the iconography at all?
Or maybe not even have the iconography at all. But it's a way to communicate theology as well. So, yeah.
So,
I thought you said that was the last question.
Did I?
He said that was the last question.
You're hearing things again.
I'm joking.
Well, okay, maybe this is the last one. This is the last one, so we can get everybody else around.
So we
the
can get
table.
the experts up. Yeah.
So, as a Christian in the 21st century, by the way, just to say, I'm standing in for people. These are not necessarily all my thoughts, right? But as a Christian in the 21st century, I still get asked, "What is your Christian name?" And when the person is asking me that, what they're asking me really is, what is your English name?
Yeah.
I find this offensive. How do I respond to that? And by the way, before you answer how I respond to that, just unpack a little bit what that actually means.
Yeah. There seems to be, this like almost Christian is synonymous with English, which again, if we interrogate that, it begins to point to the fact that Christianity is an English thing. It comes from the land of England, and what they did is that they then went out towards the earth and evangelized all the earth, like Christianity wasn't in the Afro-Asianic part of the world way before it was in Rome or in Europe. So I think that's what it's propagating and perpetuating. I would say that the pressure, the lived experience that we all have, and it only happened to me about 5 years ago, where I used to allow people to, like, if they got my name wrong, just be like, oh yeah, it's fine. And I now realize that actually, from having kids that I realized, no, I called him that for a reason. I called my daughter that for a reason. And if you allow yourself to be asked, what's your English name, even though you've told them your actual name, your Christian name, they ask you, well, no, what's your Christian name, what's your English name, but you've already told them your name, in actually giving them an altered version of it, you are perpetuating the devaluing of your culture, and you are perpetuating the devaluing of scriptures that say you are fearfully and wonderfully made. That I know your name. So that's why I was
Thank you, Jeronne. Please put your hands together. Thank you, Jeronne. Please come back. Not so fast. Please have a seat.
I got off the hook.
See?